Allô les meufs et les mecs. Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week-by-week basis. And today's topic of discussion is on education. And on the conversation on education, I want to talk about the education that starts at home, and that's around growth and development. And I think that this is an important conversation that not many of us have. We sometimes figure out on our own, we sometimes never figure it out. I want to set the tone because I think that it's important that we all recognize that we are never the same version of ourselves. We're always in a state of becoming, and I think that a lot of us are stuck in the narratives that people have told us about ourselves. A lot of us feel that we are the things that people have expressed about who we are, and we don't necessarily take the accountability or take the onus upon ourselves to frame and to develop and to nurture this evolving sense of self. We kind of think that it's an accidental thing, and it's not. It's something that can happen either by chance. Like, I think that we can wake up one day and feel completely at a loss as to who we are and how we became that way, or we can be really intentional about our own becoming, about our own growth and evolution. In my adult years, pretty intentional about my growth and evolution. I think it started with resolutions, and at first when I was introduced to the practice of resolutions, it was really focusing on things that made me happy, things that made me feel accomplished. It was really things that were more so experiential and more so about the relationships that I had and things that I wanted to experience before the end of the year. But then as I got really into goal planning, they became a lot more intrinsic. It was more about, well, how do I intentionally bring about certain qualities and traits, or how do I intentionally cultivate certain skills, or how do I intentionally build on this lens by which I view the world? Because I recognize that perception is not just a byproduct of chance, it can be also a byproduct of choice. And not many of us play into the choice involved with the perspectives that we take in the world around us. We don't necessarily have to adopt the perspectives or the perceptions that we were born into about ourselves or about the people around us. And a lot of us don't recognize that we have the choice, we have the agency to break free from those specific perceptions. And so when I think about my evolution around goals and how they were evolving from being about my environment and the things that I wanted to accomplish and the things that I wanted to do, and more about the person who I wanted to become, I started to be really cognizant of the fact that some people really froze frame who I was. And I recognized that it can be a very daunting experience to experience growth and evolution, to see the change within yourself and be surrounded by people who don't want to see the change in you. And sometimes people see it, sometimes we can grow and evolve with the people around us, but sometimes people like the box that they put you in and they don't want you out of that box. And what they'll do is they'll do everything within their power, depending on how threatened they feel and how intimidated they feel about who you might become outside of that box, to keep you constrained and to keep you in there. And I think that it's really important that we recognize that in life we can't control the reactions that our own growth and evolution creates in other people. It can create visceral responses if they have themselves been fairly ignorant of their own growth and evolution, if they themselves see themselves within this static, fixed frame and they haven't acknowledged their growth and evolution, acknowledged the way that their relationships, their non-shared experiences, the things that they have been through in life have shifted and changed their worldview. And I think that sometimes we can become the worse or better version of ourselves in the way that we frame ourselves, and it is that dissonance when it comes into question that can be really jarring for some people when they recognize that who they tell themselves they are is very different from how their choices, their actions and behaviors portray them. And they can be really having a hard time to reconcile when their actions, choices and behaviors bring them into the reality that they are maybe worse than who they thought, or even sometimes better than what they thought if they live from a place of self-hatred or self-deprecation. And so I want to talk about this concept of growth and owning our growth and owning our becoming, because I don't think it's a conversation we have enough. And I think that a lot of who we become as it relates to the people in our immediate circles, the people in our communities, or as a global citizen is a byproduct of that inward introspection, that inward reflection, and saying to yourself explicitly, like, who am I based on my choices, my behaviors, my actions? And if it is the case that I value these specific things, like, how do I have to align my choices and actions accordingly? Like, what do I need to change to become the person that I see myself becoming, or become the person that I myself personally want to be, if I'm not particularly fond of some of the traits that I see at play right now? And I think that we always have that choice, and I think we always have the agency to choose the kind of person that we want to be. We can always choose how it is that we show up in the spaces that we show up in. And I've had the opportunity, the privilege, the benefit of being in so many different spaces and places, and taking really the time to portray myself differently based on how I've grown and learned from previous experiences. And it's just so interesting how when you take agency over how you show up, how it shifts and changes how people respond. And I think that when we recognize that how we show up, how we choose to enter a room, how we choose to engage, how we choose to greet and speak to other people is a huge role to play in how people respond to us. And so because of that, when I recognize that someone is responding with hostility or with aggression, I am always very much about, well, wait, like, how did I show up here in this situation? And am I in alignment with how I've shown up? Is how I've shown up in alignment with the growth trajectory that I've been on? Or did I give this person an opportunity to feel justified in responding and behaving this way? And if I know that I didn't, and I can say that very confidently because I do act with mindfulness and with intention, then I do not hold their behavior personally. I don't take it personally because I recognize that all of us are on our own growth journey. And I also recognize that depending on the disparity between two people's growth journeys, without comparing, then someone's being in a specific space can be a very visceral, very triggering, very upsetting experience. And if they don't do that inner work, if they're never looking inwards, then they're not going to understand that their hostility and their anger and aggression, though directed outwardly, is really about the work that they failed to do within themselves. And I think that growth is like that, in that it will create visceral responses in you if you have been called to grow, like if your environment has been sending you signals to grow, but you've been stubbornly staying stagnant. And it is your job to grow. Even if there is a part of our lives that we really do glorify or we idolize, I mean, life happens with or without our desire for it to happen. We can't freeze frame life, right? And we can't freeze frame self either. So I want to have that conversation around self being this evolving, organic, creative process. And I think that if we are intentional about that process, we can be very intentional about the people that we become. And we're always becoming, right? We're always becoming either the best or the worst version of ourselves, whether that's in a moment by moment basis or on a day by day, week by week, month by month, year by year basis. We're constantly in the state of ebb and flow, and we can really be intentional and mindful about that ebb and flow if we're really cognizant about how our choices play into the becoming that we ourselves want for ourselves. And I think that what we desire for ourselves plays a significant role in how we show up and how we interact and how we grow and evolve in this life of ours. And if we're never thinking about, well, a self, like how do I want to be and how do I nurture that person within me, the potential within me to become that person, if we're always thinking about, well, how do I get and how do I attain and how do I attract, it's less about that. It's more about how do I become, how do I nurture, how do I evolve inside and then out. It's not outside and then in. It's not like, okay, well, I have, all of this emotional baggage that I've not dealt with. I have all of these issues, concerns, resentments, bitterness that I have not dealt with, but I still want X, Y, and Z, and I'm going to push for X, Y, and Z without doing that inner work. I mean, then the way that you gain those things is going to be short-lived because you have to be in a state of attraction. And I think that we can be in a state of attracting the things that we want when we're focused on becoming the people that we know we have within ourselves to be, when we're focusing on bringing about and tapping into that inner potential, into that limitlessness that I believe every single human and soul encaptures. I think that we are all limitless, but to be able to attain that limitlessness, I think that's a lifelong journey about consciousness, about being awake, about really focusing on inner forgiveness and outward forgiveness, and focusing on finding that inner alignment with your delta, your mind, body, physical, spiritual self. And so I want to have that conversation because I think too little of us put a focus on self. We don't think about who we are and who we're becoming as a byproduct of the choices and decisions that we make on a day-to-day basis. And I think that it's important that I call that out, and hopefully with that call out, I also give you an opportunity to introspect on yourself and introspect on your becoming, and give yourselves a moment to recognize like how far you've come, however your journey has translated, and also give yourself a moment to think about, well, who and what would you like to be, and how do you get there, and what is it that you need to do to get there? Like, what are the actions, the behaviors, the choices that you need to put into place to further invest in your own becoming? Because life doesn't happen to us, it happens with us, but it only happens with us to the extent that we acknowledge our own agency in the growth trajectory that we are on. So that's the conversation that I wanted to have today. Some food for thought for you. I've been focusing a lot on my growth and how that has translated across some of the difficulties and challenges and hardships in my life. And I have to say that I have pushed through things that 10 years ago, I do not think that I would have known how to even wrap my head around it. And a lot of that is a byproduct of going inward, of focusing on who do I want to become, like what choices are going to be the best for me if I align to them, like how do I make point to be in alignment with my highest self, and how do I focus on nurturing myself in not letting life happen to me to such an extent that I lose sight of who I am. And so that's the conversation for today, some food for thought for you to take a moment to introspect and to focus on self, focus on how you frame yourself, how you think about your own perceptions, your own judgments, how you think about the behaviors that you engage in, the actions that you engage in, and give yourself the opportunity to level set. Have that honest conversation with yourself, however hard it needs to be, and start anew. We always have the opportunity to start from scratch. And I'm here to give you that guidance to do just that. And so that's the topic of conversation for today. Now, if you did want to focus on self-mastery, if that's a conversation that is of interest to you, then I do invite you to tune in to our live events. Yes, so we do host live events at least twice a month, every month for the foreseeable future on our website. So definitely be sure to check those out. Now, these events are paid events. So if you do see yourself participating in our community on an ongoing basis, then I do suggest that you take a look at one of our package plans. Yeah, so we do offer package plans that give you the opportunity to participate in webinars, workshops,